Welcome to Talking Points with Preferred Health Magazine.
Today's guest is Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, a pioneering biochemist and one of the world's leading experts on nitric oxide, often called the miracle molecule for its vital role in circulation, energy, and overall health. Dr. Bryan earned his PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology and went on to train under Nobel laureate Dr. Farid Murad, one of the original discoverers of nitric oxide's importance in the human body. Over the past 2 decades, he's published groundbreaking research, authored books, and developed innovative therapies that are changing how we think about cardiovascular and metabolic health. He's also an entrepreneur, the founder of several companies, translating his nitric oxide research into real-world solutions from supplements to medical applications, helping people restore what he calls the body's natural ability to heal itself. Dr. Bryan's work bridges science, medicine, and wellness, and today we'll explore why nitric oxide matters, how lifestyle choices affect its production, and what simple steps can make us live longer, healthier lives. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this show. All right, Dr. Bryan, well, thank you for coming on, speaking with me today for Talking Points with Preferred Health Magazine. You are a guest that I've been dying to speak with for some time now.
Well, thank you, Angeline. It's great to be with you.
Yeah. Well, you are our leading biochemist, it seems, for nitric oxide, all things nitric oxide, right?
That's right. I've been doing it a long time.
A long time. I wanted to actually first, start with what first sparked your interest in the study of nitric oxide, and how is your understanding of its importance? How has that evolved over the years for you?
Well, I first got interested in nitric oxide in the late 90s. I had a degree in biochemistry from the University of Texas. I was a student at LSU School of Medicine. I was working on a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology. And the Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine had just been awarded to 3 U.S. scientists for their discovery of nitric oxide. And during my training, my mentor was a pharmacologist who had been in the nitric oxide field for the previous 20 years.
Right.
So we knew this was an important field of study. Obviously, if a Nobel Prize had just been awarded. And so, Lou Ignarro, who came to LSU and gave a lecture, made a statement and said, Nathan, if we can figure out how to restore the natural production of nitric oxide, it'll change the world, and it'll change the way we treat and manage chronic disease. So that was a pretty profound statement. And so that's what really got me interested. And then, we spent the next 25, 30 years now, or 25 years trying to understand how the human body makes nitric oxide, what goes wrong in people that can't make it, and then how do we fix it?
Well, can we start there for those who are unfamiliar? Can you explain what nitric oxide is and why it's so essential for human health?
Well, it's a naturally produced molecule. It's a signaling molecule. It's how cells in the body communicate with one another. It's mostly recognized as a vasodilator. And what that means is when it's produced, it lets the blood vessels dilate. So now we can improve oxygen delivery, improve blood flow and circulation. So that's how it was first discovered. But, we know it's a signaling molecule that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and go and repair and replace dysfunctional cells. It activates the energy-producing organelles of the cell, our mitochondria, and it activates an enzyme called telomerase that prevents our telomeres from getting shorter. So when we look at longevity and lifespan, shorter telomeres, shorter lifespan, longer telomeres, longer lifespan. So that's just a handful of really the fundamental kind of physiological functions of nitric oxide. But everything we know about health, longevity, and human optimization is dependent upon the body's ability to make adequate nitric oxide.
I mean, it absolutely sounds like that. That is the miracle molecule, as they call it. So what happens in the body? Do we start to lose nitric oxide over the years? And when does that start?
Well, the clinical data reveal just that. If you take different age groups, what we find is, and this is what we call endothelial function, or the ability of the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels to produce nitric oxide. So what we find is about a 10 to 12% decline per decade. And this starts in our 20s. So really, by the time most people are 40 to 50 years old, you only have about 50% of the production capacity we had when we were younger. Now today, and those data are about 20 years old. But today, we know that that doesn't have to be the case. We can prevent this age-related decline. We understand what leads to endothelial dysfunction, what leads to nitric oxide deficiency. And now that we understand that, we can take corrective and protective measures to prevent that age-related decline. And that's the goal.
When you say that, what are we talking about? Are we talking about exercise? Are we talking about nutrition? Are we talking about everyday things that
we kind of all already know we should be doing.
Yeah.
Is that what we're speaking of, or is there a different type of treatment?
No, look, I think everything you mentioned certainly contributes to the nitric oxide production or the nitric oxide decline. So, important things like anything that leads to an increase in blood sugar. And I think that's why these continuous glucose monitors are so important because it tells you how your body metabolizes certain foods. And we don't want to see a glucose spike. We don't want to see an insulin spike because
That would
glue,
indicate that nitric oxide was not at its best, or what would that indicate to us?
well, it's a vicious circle because we need nitric oxide for insulin to do its job and to get glucose into the cell. And excess glucose shuts down nitric oxide production. So once you start that, it leads to hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, and eventually type 2 diabetes because sugar is sticky, right? Glucose is glue, as the name implies. So it sticks to proteins, it sticks to enzymes, and renders them dysfunctional. So that's number one. You have to just eliminate sugar and simple carbs. Number two, moderate physical exercise. Exercise stimulates and activates nitric oxide production, and that's why exercise is medicine because it helps stimulate the production of nitric oxide. Then the other thing, the major barriers and inhibitors of nitric oxide production are things that kill the microbiome, the bacteria in and on our body. So things like fluoride in your toothpaste, fluoride in your drinking water, antiseptic mouthwash. We published several years ago that if you use mouthwash, your blood pressure goes up because it's killing these essential non-pathogenic nitric oxide producing bacteria. And then the third really big contributor are antacids, the proton pump inhibitors that many people are on. And those drugs completely shut down nitric oxide production. So
Wow.
we have to stop doing the things that are inhibiting the natural production of nitric oxide and then start doing the things that are known to clinically activate it and stimulate nitric oxide production.
Okay, and those things, like you're saying, are exercising, or stop using these kind of, mouthwashes and the fluoride in the toothpaste, fluoride in the water. What are there other things though that we're not speaking of that we can do to help ourselves?
Yeah, you can get 20 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight a day. Sunlight activates, stimulates nitric oxide release, very important. And then a balanced diet in moderation. I think an 18-hour daily fast is very beneficial in terms of improving our metabolic flexibility. And we need nitrate from our diet, so throw in some more green leafy vegetables, and then fuel both of these pathways. But it's really very simple. It's getting good night's sleep. It's getting 20, 30 minutes of sunlight a day. We have to exercise. We have to move. And as I said, intermittent fasting. And then stop doing the things that are disrupting that.
And I know you mentioned earlier, just before, that there's evidence that nitric oxide and cardiovascular health are connected with the blood flow to the organs and et cetera, even immunity, sexual function. So which areas of research do you find most compelling right now?
Well, for me, I'm excited because we're developing an Alzheimer's drug, a nitric oxide drug for Alzheimer's.
It's
But
amazing.
when you look at chronic disease, it's all the same. We've made medicine too complicated because if you look at Alzheimer's, if you look at cardiovascular disease, if you look at erectile dysfunction, autoimmune disease, pulmonary disease, there's four common denominators that happen in all of these. There's reduced blood flow or lack of regulation of blood flow to the organ. There's runaway inflammation, there's oxidative stress, and then there's immune dysfunction in that tissue. And all of that is because we've lost the ability to produce nitric oxide because nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels. Now we can perfuse the organ. It decreases inflammation. In fact, I have a number of patents on ways of reducing inflammation with nitric oxide.
Wow.
It inhibits the oxidative stress we see in these end organ disease,
Sure.
and it corrects the immune dysfunction. So nitric oxide is the fundamental foundational molecule for health and longevity. So that's one. But what I'm really excited is Alzheimer's because companies have irresponsibly spent billions and billions of dollars on developing monoclonal antibodies against tau tangles and amyloid plaque.
Oh, yeah.
And those drugs don't work. They can't work because those are the consequence of the disease. They don't cause the disease. So what we're finding is that Alzheimer's is a vascular metabolic disease. There's always decreased blood flow to the brain. There's insulin resistance in the brain. We call it diabetes type 3. And what does nitric oxide do? It dilates the blood vessels, gets blood flow to the brain, it gets glucose into the cell so you don't get insulin resistance. And when you do that, you don't get misfolding of proteins. People don't lose their cognition, they can recall memory, and you can restore normal function. So
I
I
mean,
believe, well, I
God,
don't believe, I know that nitric oxide will completely eradicate Alzheimer's, and we're betting that we can even regress disease.
I mean, this makes me so happy to hear. When is this going to start to become part of our everyday Western medicine treatment? Why aren't more doctors pushing for this?
Well, I think the primary reason is there's been no safe and effective nitric oxide drugs that have been approved by the FDA. So there's nothing that physicians can prescribe for these patients. And most physicians, most Western allopathic physicians don't use supplements, and with good reason, because 99% of the nitric oxide supplements on the market do not provide any real benefit for nitric oxide.
Really?
So, yeah, because the people, the companies who are selling these products don't understand the enzymology and the biochemistry or the role of the microbiome. So what they're doing is they're throwing arginine, citrulline, or beets in capsules and calling it a nitric oxide product.
Wow.
The problem is the reason patients become nitric oxide deficient is they lost the ability to utilize those. So it's like putting gas in a car with a blown up engine. It's not
Okay.
going to get you where you need to go unless you understand the underlying biochemistry and physiology. Then you really have no business trying to create a nitric oxide product because they just don't understand the science. So I think that's the primary reason. But I believe that once we get our drugs through the FDA and start having safe and effective nitric oxide drugs on the market, and we're going to see the benefit across a number of different patient indications, then it will become more mainstream, and everybody will be talking about nitric oxide because it's going to be heralded as a hero molecule.
I mean, I'm looking forward to that day. What are some of the symptoms, though? Are there symptoms that you can tell? I mean, you say it said a lot of diseases,
Yeah.
obviously, but are there like any underlying or quiet symptoms that somebody might be nitric oxide deficient, or how does that begin?
Well, we're understanding there's a hierarchy of symptoms that develop at different stages of nitric oxide deficiency. So the first one to show up is usually sexual dysfunction or erectile dysfunction.
Okay.
And that occurs in both men and women, by the way. It's not just a male disease.
It's
Because what
just, it's
happens
funny that you
when
say that though, because usually, I mean, you said it starts at 30 and you start declining right after that age.
yeah.
So does it matter with the age or how does that work?
Now look, it's when we look at population-based studies, it's average. So there are obviously some outliers, but 50% of the men over the age of 40 self-report erectile dysfunction. But I've got some clinician colleagues who are seeing 18, 22-year-old kids presenting with erectile dysfunction and having
Wow.
to be put on drug therapy for ED, and that's tragic. But here's what happens because to get an erection in both men and women, either a penile or clitoral erection,
Right.
you have to dilate the blood vessels to allow for increased blood flow and engorgement.
Sure.
And that dilation is dependent upon nitric oxide production. So if the blood vessels can't make nitric oxide, you don't get vasodilation and you don't get engorgement.
Okay.
So we call that the canary in the coal mine because it's a systemic disease that manifests first in the sex organs. So if you can't dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs on demand, you can't dilate the blood vessels of the coronaries on demand or the cerebral arteries or any blood vessel, any vascular bed in the body.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number
I'm
two,
surprised that that's where one of the first symptoms shows up.
well, it's pervasive because we just look at the statistics, and when you treat ED as strictly a lifestyle disorder and not consider it an early marker for the rapid onset of cardiovascular disease, the number one killer of men and women worldwide, you grossly underestimate the severity of the issue.
Okay.
So then number two, your blood pressure starts to go up. And 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And what happens in the regulation of blood pressure, we have to be able to dilate the blood vessels. The blood vessels have to be soft and compliant. So with each heartbeat, it dampens that pulse response. And as long as we make nitric oxide, we're dilating the blood vessels. But if we lose the ability to make nitric oxide, now the blood vessels become chronically constricted. Now we've got the same volume of blood going through smaller pipes, resistance increases, and that tells us that pressure goes up. Those are simple laws of physics.
Sure.
And so, again, huge problem. 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation of blood pressure. Number three, you start to develop insulin resistance. And 9 out of 10 Americans are metabolically unfit. They're developing insulin resistance and diabetes. And we published in 2011 that nitric oxide is required for insulin to do its job and to bring glucose into the cell. Without nitric oxide, you develop insulin resistance. And then number four, you start to develop exercise intolerance because we need to dilate blood vessels upon exercise to increase the oxygen delivery due
Okay.
to the increased metabolic demands. And then number five, you start to get mild cognitive impairment, brain fog, dementia, and eventually Alzheimer's. But those are the latest stages. So the body continues to tell us and talks to us and speak to us that something's wrong and that we call those symptoms. And if we don't pay attention to those symptoms and take corrective measures, people die of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. And it's all due to nitric oxide deficiency.
And really sadly, everything you just mentioned is all we ever hear about, right? There's some of the biggest killers out there, heart disease especially. When you talk about having the optimal amount of nitric oxide in our bodies at all times, at all stages of our lives, is that something that's even possible?
It's not impossible, but it's a difficult task just because the world we live in, we're exposed to toxins. The food we consume is depleted of most nutrients. There's data showing that the same vegetables grown in US soil in the 1940s compared to the 2010s, there's 78% less nutrients. The
Unbelievable.
same vegetables. And then, we're exposed to toxins, herbicides, pesticides, environmental toxins. 5G is now a frequency that's disrupting a lot of enzymatic activity, including the production of nitric oxide.
Right.
So what I try to do is eliminate myself from exposure to toxins, make sure I get the proper nutrients.
Okay.
I practice nasal breathing. I drink good, clean water. I get, usually 7 to 9, 10 hours of sleep a night. And then I exercise, and then I get direct sunlight. And that seems to, but I always take, I take a nitric oxide supplement that I develop because I want to make sure that I always have adequate nitric oxide, adequate circulation, adequate tissue oxygenation at all times because it's very difficult to maintain optimal levels.
Now, is that medication that you developed on the market at this time, or we haven't gotten
It is.
anything FDA approved yet?
No, it's not a medication. I developed a dietary supplement years ago. So we were using natural product chemistry that basically recapitulates nitric oxide production and signaling.
And where
So,
can we find that?
our consumer products are at n101.com. It's the letter N, number one, letter O, number one.com. And so these are dietary supplements designed to restore the natural production of nitric oxide. But it's more than that because my products produce nitric oxide gas. So if your body can't make it, we have to make it for you. And then we fix the reason, we recouple the enzyme, we restore the function of the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels, and we're restoring the oral bacteria. So the longer you take this, the more your body is able to naturally produce nitric oxide. So
That's
that's the
wonderful.
supplement side, but we're developing, a medication going through the FDA.
I will be purchasing that later on this afternoon. Let me ask you this. At any stage, can somebody purchase this and it be beneficial for them? Or is there such a thing as too much nitric oxide?
Well, there's always such a thing as too much of anything, right? You can drink too much water and have hypotonic lysis and people die.
Right.
But yeah, what we worry about is nitric oxide is an unsafe drop in blood pressure in a condition called methemoglobinemia, where too much will oxidize the iron of the hemoglobin in the red blood cell and reduce the oxygen carrying capacity. So you get cyanotic, blue around the lips, but
Wow.
you don't see that. We don't see that.
Okay.
But no, there's only two people in the world who need my nitric oxide supplement. It's people who are sick and want to get well. It's the people who are well and don't want to get sick. So we have to
I
maintain
love
these
that.
optimal levels. And so, you know, I think dose is determined by your underlying condition. So for me, as a 51-year-old, very healthy, very active individual, I take one in the morning, one in the evening, 12 hours apart. And based on the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of what we've developed, that's optimal. But now if have other issues, you may need more frequent dosing to overcome those metabolic challenges.
What about a female like myself, 51 years old as well? Does it matter for male or female? Is it different?
No, I mean it's based on, the interesting thing, I shouldn't say that because postmenopausal women, when you lose the protective effects of estrogen, then your nitric oxide rapidly declines. So I would say premenopausal, perimenopausal, you can probably, and as long as you have normal blood pressure, you're active and otherwise healthy, then one lozenge twice a day is probably sufficient. But as you reach menopause and you're no longer producing enough estrogen to activate endogenous nitric oxide production, it
Okay.
may be that you need one every 8 hours. on that. But I think we just dose accordingly, see how your body responds, and then you can, back up or add more.
Well, let me ask you this also. You're saying we would obviously see which works. When I go on your website and I get this later on today, and I buy your product later on today, how will I determine if this is something I need and how long I need it, and how many times a day would I need it?
Well, I think it's always good to start with a baseline. What's your baseline blood pressure? What's your baseline fasting glucose, fasting insulin? We look at acute phase inflammatory markers like elevation in ferritin or C-reactive protein. Look at kidney function. And
Okay.
then if all of those are normal and within normal range, then one lozenge twice a day is going to be sufficient. I've been doing this for 20 years. Now,
Okay.
if you have some parameters that are off, then you just dose accordingly. So if you got a blood pressure of say 135 over 90, then you can dose that lozenge until we bring it down to around 120 over 80. And so that's an easy dosimeter. And then if you've got elevation of fasting glucose, anything greater than, I like to say anything greater than 90, then we need to bring that down to have a fasting glucose of around 80. And same thing with insulin. Let's get it into normal levels. And then if C-reactive protein is elevated, we can reduce C-reactive protein within about 37% within 30 days. If triglycerides are elevated, we see a 27% reduction in triglycerides within 30 days. And that's taken
Wow.
the lozenge once, twice daily. So even that once, twice daily is going to
Makes
bring some of these, relevant biomarkers back into the normal range.
That's unbelievable. That's amazing. What are I know you mentioned earlier the oral microbiome and how we're kind of destroying it with mouthwash and some
Yeah.
fluoride toothpaste. Tell us more about that. I know you have a few products on the market with that as well.
Yeah, so about 20, 30 years ago, it was first discovered that there's bacteria that live on the crypts of the tongue that are involved in this nitrogen cycle, the human nitrogen cycle. And so when we consume inorganic nitrate from the diet or we recirculate nitrate from the nitric oxide that's being produced, the bacteria on the crypts of the tongue reduce this or metabolize this into nitrite. And this is a very important step because humans do not have the capacity to do this. We do not express a functional nitrate reductase enzyme. And so we're 100% dependent upon the bacteria. So if we eradicate the bacteria, then we don't get the nitric oxide benefit from the diet, and we've lost the ability to recycle our own endogenous nitric oxide production. So then fluoride's put in toothpaste because it's antiseptic. Fluoride's put in our water supply because it kills the bacteria in the pipes. And then we bathe in it, we drink it, we
Right.
cook in it, it kills the bacteria in our pipes. And today we know that every single chronic disease is associated with dysbiosis. And so we have to remove fluoride. I think there's an initiative underway by this administration to get fluoride out of the drinking water because it provides zero benefit. And a study from the National Toxicology Program last year revealed that fluoride in drinking water can reduce IQ in kids by as much as 7 points. And it shuts down your thyroid function, causes dysbiosis, and it's a neurotoxin. So why are we putting this in toothpaste? And why are we putting this in drinking water? So we have to get it out. That's number one. Number two, if you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. We and others published that if you take normal intensive patients, you give them mouthwash, it kills the bacteria and their blood pressure goes up. We have to stop using mouthwash. And so then the other thing are antacids. Antacids completely shut down nitric oxide production, and 200 million prescriptions written for antacids every year, and 2 out of 3 Americans report using an over-the-counter antacid. This is a huge problem.
Okay.
So to combat that, I developed oral products, an oral line of products. I've been using a fluoride-free toothpaste for more than 20 years, but I found that there were still components in there that were destroying the oral microbiome that we were testing and identifying. So I
Okay.
developed my own toothpaste that targets the microbiome. So hydroxyapatite based to remineralize the teeth, fluoride-free, so we're not killing the bacteria, but we're putting prebiotics and components in there that restore the ecology of the commensal bacteria, maintaining normal salivary pH. And what we're finding is people who have an elevation in blood pressure, they switch to our CardioSmile toothpaste. We restore the oral flora, we improve nitric oxide production, and their blood pressure comes down.
That's
I mean,
unbelievable.
it's that simple. And now we're making a nitric oxide friendly mouth rinse that will launch probably in the Q1 of next year. Same principle. Let's target and improve the microbiome and get away from antiseptics, antibiotics, fluoride, anything. We become a germophobic society and it's killing us.
That gets the scary thing, because you're right, we have, and we're doing all the things that are actually hurting our immune system and in our metabolic system. So you're right. Now, if you can give one key takeaway about nitric oxide that everyone should know, what would it be?
Well, it's clear with over 200,000 papers published in the scientific and medical literature, your body cannot and will not heal or perform optimally without nitric oxide. And I think it's simply the missing molecule that most people have ignored or have been unaware of this for, the past, 20, 30 years. And we must put nitric oxide front and center in our life, understand what we may be doing that's disrupting its natural production, and then start doing the things that can restore its natural production so we can prevent this age-related decline and prevent age-related disease.
I thank you so much for all of your research and everything you do. You have a couple of books out right now. What are those? You have
I do. This is my latest book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. This book I published in February of this year through Brick Tower Press and my agent, Alan Morrell. But it tells the story of nitric oxide, how it was discovered, what led to a Nobel Prize, and it journeys and chronicles all the discoveries we've made. And then, it tells my personal story of discovery too, my background, where I came from, and how I've had to overcome a lot of obstacles because what we do is very disruptive. And when you do something that's disruptive, you become a target. I've been a target of a number of lawsuits from competitors, and people try to shut me down and destroy me personally, financially, and professionally because what we do is very disruptive. And so my motivation for writing it was, number one, educate and inform on nitric oxide, but number two, hopefully motivate and inspire people that if you're being opposed and getting a lot of resistance in what you're doing, that means you're doing something. You're on the verge of a breakthrough, and it's groundbreaking.
It seems to be the case lately, right? We're noticing more and more that the closer we get to health, and wellness and natural remedies there's resistance. So
but stick to it.
I will make sure everyone goes ahead and visits your website and gets your products and absolutely reads that book. I think what you're doing is amazing, and I want to thank you for your research and what you're putting forth.
Well, thank you very much for having me and helping us to, educate the masses on the importance of nitric oxide.
This is wonderful. Good to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of Talking Points with Preferred Health Magazine, and thank you to Dr. Nathan Bryan for fighting back cardiovascular disease and aging with nitric oxide. Please be sure to get a copy of his book, The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. Get yourself a copy today, and be sure to visit his website, www.n101.com, and check out some of his proprietary products online. If you like this interview, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to our channel today, and if you'd like to be a guest on Talking Points, please inquire at info@preferredhealthmagazine.com.